All right, so it's time for the tour of Maya 2018. When you open it up, it will look something like this. It may look slightly different, but generally it'll look like this. And so we're just going to go through the whole interface, give you an idea of what's there, and then we'll move on from there. So first up, we've got our menus right up here at the top. And so there is the first 7 of these menus are pretty standard. File, edit, create, select, modify, display, windows. They're pretty obvious what they do. The rest of the menus are going to be context sensitive in a way. So right now we are in the modeling menu set. If we look right here on the top left where it says modeling, if you click that drop down, you've got 4 other options. You can do a customized menu set, but you can do rigging, animation, FX, and rendering. If I click on rendering, you can see that a bunch of those menus changed. And if I go to animation, it changes again. And same thing with rigging. So depending on what the task is that you're doing at that time, you can change your menu sets. So we'll stay in modeling for the first few weeks. Just want you to know that all of those are there. So that's how you change menu sets. Again, we're going to stick mostly in modeling. We've got you can see each of these menus has a bunch of different options. And there's a few different things that I want to call out in these menus. So if I go to, let's say, display. This first line here, we got this double dashed line right at the top. If you click that, you can break that panel off, and now it's a separate window. So if you're trying to manage your screen real estate, and maybe you've got 2 screens at home, or you're just working on the screens here, you just need to organize things. You can break things off if you're going to be using one menu quite a bit. So like if I go to the Create Polygon Primitives menu, I can break that off if I know I'm going to be making a bunch of these things. This is going to be important when you guys are doing your homework, because the homework is going to be creating something with all of these primitives. So if you want quick access to that, that's one way to do it. Another thing to call out in these menus is a lot of the menu options will have a little box next to them. That's how you get to the options. So if I say go to the cube options, you're going to want to click on that box. That's going to bring up the polygon cube options. Okay, and there's even more options there. So it seems like every menu has another menu, and each menu has more menus and options and settings. I know there's a lot. We'll break it down. Another thing to note is that this is just one way to create a cube. There are a couple of different ways, a couple of other ways that you can also create a cube. So as I'll try to cover all of the different options, just so you can kind of figure out what works best for you and go from there. It doesn't necessarily matter how you get there. It's just that you do get there. So those are the menus up top. Right below that, we have what Maya calls the status line. Okay, so we've got some pretty standard icons where you've got create a new scene, open a scene, save a scene, and then undo and redo. Then we've got, these are some select options. So if I go to, let's say I create a sphere, and if I click on this third option, now I can see all of the individual components. It's selection mode. So you can select components, you can select the object as a whole, or if you have groups of objects, that's what this last one here is for. Again, don't worry too much about it, I just want to cover it once. These menus also, you'll notice these vertical dividers, and it's not immediately intuitive what that means, but those are actually hiding even more options. So if you see a little arrow, you can click on that, it'll expand out that section, and you'll see more options there. So if you don't have something visible, let's say these are all of your render options, and say you don't have render options in the top bar, it might just be because it's hidden. Moving over to the right, you can sign in with your Autodesk account. I never do. It works just fine without it. Workspace, so much like in After Effects or Premiere, there are preset workspaces. So I'm going to tend to stick in Classic. I'm not going to do a whole lot of interface customization in this class, just so that everybody's kind of working from a standard starting point, but feel free to do that if you see fit. But you can see different workspaces for different tasks and how the layout can change depending on what you're working on. But again, I'm going to keep it on Maya Classic most of the time. Right below that, we have some Toolbox Icons. And these are the icons that govern what is visible in this right pane. Okay, so we've got a channel box layer editor. Channel box is where we have some options for individual objects, as well as when you create an object, kind of the initial object settings. Below that, we have all our layers. So you can give objects, lights, cameras, you can give them their own layers, and then you can individually hide or show those layers. You can set layers to be locked so you can't accidentally select something in that layers. Very similar to Photoshop. We will get into that a little bit later on this semester. We also have Modeling Toolkit, which has some commonly used tools. We'll cover that next week. Attribute Editor gives you all the information about each object, as well as a bunch of settings that you can adjust and change. And I know there's a lot here, and we won't cover most of it. There are some things that we will cover, but a lot of it we won't. If you ever have any questions about what any specific thing does, I would direct you to the Maya Help interface, and you can go through each of these very specifically. So like right now, let's see, we're looking at the toolbox. Actually, no, we're not. We're looking at I can't remember what Maya calls it. I never remember the Maya terminology. But you can go and look there if you're curious what mesh component display actually does. Human IK you might have up there. You can completely ignore that. That's for animating human figures. We're not going to do that this semester. But that's there. Moving down below it, we have our time slider or timeline, which is the numbers are frames, not seconds, in case you were wondering. Then you've got this box here is your current frame, just to the right of the time slider. Then you've got some playback controls to the right of that. And then moving down one, here we have the range slider. And so what the range slider is what section of the timeline that you're seeing. And it actually breaks it down so that you've got, if you look at the fields to the left and to the right of the time slider, you've got your starting frame for the whole animation, and then you have your starting frame for the time slider, and then you've got your ending frame for the time slider or the range slider, and then you've got the ending frame. So this is a 200 frame animation. We are currently on frame 110, and then the range slider goes from 1 to 120. If I move that, you can see how those numbers adjust. Now we're looking at frames 55 to 174, but it's still a full 200 frame animation. Below that, we've got a couple of helpful things. We've got this MEL area for MEL scripting. We're not going to do any scripting in Maya. It is a fairly powerful feature of Maya, but not anything we're going to concern ourselves with. To the right of that is if there are any errors that pop up, you'll see the message pop up in this box here. It may be highlighted in yellow or red depending on the severity of the error, but that's where you will look. And then finally at the bottom, we have the help bar. So it'll give you little tooltips. If you're not sure what an icon is, you can look as I hover over different icons, it'll tell me what each one does. So this is isolate selected, this is smooth shade all, this is wireframe. If I want to know what this does, it's the bridge tool. Okay, so if you're not sure what something does, look in the bottom left of your screen and you'll see that there. Moving around to the left side, I know I'm ignoring the giant area in the middle of the screen. We'll get to that here in a second. On the left side here, we have our toolbox. And these are the most commonly used tools. The first one is select. The second one is a lasso tool. So if I want to lasso select, I can choose that and lasso select things that way. We have paint select, so you can select with a paintbrush. You see the paintbrush is scaled poorly, but that's there. And then underneath that, you have the really most commonly used tools: move, rotate, and scale. And I'm going to go back to object mode here. Move, rotate, and scale. So you've got, for the move, rotate, and scale tools, you can see we've got little arrows that'll allow you to move in just that direction. Okay. I'm going to hit pause on the tools here for a second, and we'll come back to them once I tell you how to add objects to the scene, because I realize I haven't done that yet. So we'll circle back around to that. Right below the toolbox here, we have some preset layouts for Maya. So right now we're just in a single panel view. Right below it, we have a quad view, so we can see the perspective in the top right, and then the side view in the bottom right, the front view in the bottom left, and the top view in the top left. Now you can see in white at the bottom of each section what each view is. Now, one really nice feature about this is if you're in this quad view and you just want to zoom in on one particular view, tap the space bar and it will enlarge that view. And then you can tap the space bar again and go back to the quad view, then go to top view and kind of bounce around that way. Presets there. You can just do a split view, and then you've got this bottom option is bringing up the outliner, so you can see all the different objects in your scene listed, very similar to After Effects. Let's move back up. I'm going to go back to the single view, and then right here, right above the viewport, we've got all these little tabs. This is called the tool shelf, or the shelf area. Again, these are all kind of grouped together by task. So if you're just creating objects and doing modeling, polymodeling is where we're going to spend most of our time. If you're doing sculpting, Maya does have its own sculpting tools as well. You got those options, rigging, animation, Arnold, which is a renderer. That's where we'll be doing a lot of our rendering because it just looks really nice. Bifrost is for fluid simulation. RenderMan, if you have that, don't use it. It's terrible. Well, that's not true. RenderMan is great. It's what Pixar uses to render their movies, but the functionality in this lab is terrible, so we're not going to use it. There's some motion graphics options as well. You can also customize these shelves if you desire. Again, I'm not going to worry about customizing anything because I want to keep everything pretty standard. And now right below that, we have the viewport, which is the largest area of the screen. This is where you interact with your scene and you actually make things. So if you click on, let's say, the polymodeling shelf, and you click on sphere and you add a sphere to your scene, now you can look at it in the viewport. To actually move the view around in the viewport, you hold down Option and then use each of the 3 buttons. So there's a reason why we have a 3-button mouse in this lab. Aside from the fact that Apple refuses to make a proper mouse, this is how you navigate around. So hold down Alt or Option and left mouse button, and you will orbit your view. Okay, so you can look at your objects from all sides. If you Option and middle click and drag, you're going to pan your view around. Option middle click, and then Option right click is going to zoom in or dolly in. Okay. A couple other commands that I find particularly useful. I'm going to add a couple more objects here just so you can see them. All right, so if you only want to focus on one thing, you can select that object and hit F to frame it up, and it'll zoom into whatever you have selected. And then if you hit A, it'll show everything. So let's say I move one of these cubes kind of far away, frame up on the sphere, and then hit A. Now it's going to zoom out so I can see everything in my scene. In the viewport itself has its own set of menus and options. So probably, at least for now, the most important thing is to look at the panels. And this is where you can change your view if you'd like. So you got perspective view, which is what we're in right now. If you go to orthographic, then you can look at the front view and the side view, or any other view. So, but I'm going to keep it on perspective. Also, if you have cameras in your scene, you'll see them in the perspective list here as well. So that's how you can look at different views. And then we've got a few different options, which we'll get to as we add more, as we get into the solar system. I would say is just take a minute, add a couple objects. You can just go to the poly modeling shelf and just click on these different objects, and then use your move, your rotate, and your scale tools, and just get familiar with that in working in the scene, and just get familiar moving your camera around in 3D space. Okay, so as you're kind of messing around in 3D space and adding objects, right now I've just kind of told you about the icons on the side. There are some key command shortcuts in Maya. The most important are Q, W, E, and R. So Q will bring up your select tool that just lets you select objects. W is going to be your move tool. So you can still select objects, but you can also move them. And then E is your rotate tool, and R is scale. So it just goes straight across with QWERTY. Q, W, E, and R. Those are going to be your main shortcut keys. If you can't see something, for instance, if I add another cube to this scene, I can't see it because it's inside the sphere. So if I hit 4 on the number pad, I can see it in wireframe mode, and 5 is solid if I want to get back to the shaded view. So 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded. You can also see those options right up here in the Viewport menu. We've got you can see the wireframe view of a cube, and then this blue cube is going to be your shaded view. Another thing, if you find yourself looking at a bunch of dots on your object, those are vertices. They are part of what makes up an object. Also, there are edges, and then there are faces. If you want to get out of that and back into an object view, right-click, hold down the right mouse button, just hold it down, and then move your mouse to object mode, and you'll get back into the full object mode. So we're not going to worry about vertices and edges and faces today. That'll be next week. We'll start talking about components and editing those. Today I just want to deal with the whole object and get you familiar with working that way. One other note about these, the move, rotate, and scale tools and the manipulators. We've got your arrows, which can move in the X, Y, and Z directions. Okay. If we look down in the lower left corner, we've got a little widget with a red X, a green Y, and a blue Z. Those are the directions. Those are the coordinates in Maya. And the arrows on the move tool correspond to those. So if you want to move something in the X direction, you want to select the red arrow. If it's yellow, that means it's already selected. But that lets you move it in those specific directions. And then you've got these little squares, which allow you to move it in that planar direction. So this square right here will allow you to move it in the X and the Y, but not in the Z direction. Okay? No matter how hard I try, I cannot move this back or forward in the Z direction. Okay, so if you want to, let's say I've got this sphere and I've got it perfectly set on the floor. Let me just get rid of that cube. And I want to move it around, but I don't want it to leave the floor. Then I can grab this bottom square and I can move it in the X and the Z direction, but it won't move in the Y direction. Okay. And then if I just select the center square, I can move it in any direction, just based on the angle that I'm looking at it with the viewport. Okay. So that's the kind of the general once-over of Maya. I'm going to stop this video, and then we're going to get really close to making the solar system.